Hey there, sleepless rabble. If you've been searching for a calm, true crime story to drift off to, you've come to the right place. Tonight, we're stepping into the quiet, unsettling world of Jeffrey Dahmer, the man who seemed ordinary, but hid something the world would never forget. No gore, no shock, just a slow, hypnotic retelling of how an awkward boy from Ohio became the name whispered in every true crime conversation. Before we dive in, do me a small favor. Hit like, tap subscribe, and if you want to support what I do, you can at kofi.com/NAPMAX. It keeps the stories coming. And here's my question for you tonight. What unsettles you more? How long Jeffrey Dahmer went unnoticed? Or how normal he seemed on the surface? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I read them all. Now, settle in. Let me take over for a while. This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you're listening to Jeffrey Dahmer, the quiet boy who became a monster. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Backyard. Bath, Ohio. A postcard town if there ever was one. Tree-lined streets, kids pedaling bikes until the streetlights blinked on. The kind of place where a summer breeze carried the smell of fresh-cut grass and charcoal grills. And somewhere among the baseball games and lemonade stands was Jeff, a quiet boy with sandy blonde hair and a gaze that never seemed to settle on the world around him. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trouble. If anything, he was the kid you forgot was in your class until roll call. His parents, Lionel and Joyce, fit the suburban script at first glance. Father, a chemist. Mother, a homemaker. Respectable, educated. The American dream, neatly packaged. But step inside that house, and the picture cracked. Arguments that escalated into shouting matches. Joyce battling her own demons. Anxiety, pills, endless complaints of illness. Lionel, buried in work, doing what men of that era did best, avoiding the emotional storm. Jeff was caught in the middle, too young to stop it, too old to ignore it. So he retreated into a world of his own making. While other kids ran screaming through sprinklers, Jeff wandered the woods behind his house, alone, looking for things that didn't run away. It started small. Bones. Tiny, harmless bones. The kind a curious kid might find and toss aside. Except Jeff didn't toss them aside. He collected them. Studied their shapes. Their clean geometry. There was something calming about the order of it. In a house full of chaos, these bones didn't argue. They didn't yell. They just existed. Soon, his fascination grew. Roadkill. Dead squirrels. A raccoon struck by a car. Things no one else would look at twice. Jeff dragged them home like trophies. Not for cruelty, at least not yet, but for control. To take apart, piece by piece, and understand what made them what they were. Neighbors never noticed. Teachers chalked his quietness up to shyness. Even his parents missed the signs, too busy fighting their own battles to see the storm gathering in their son. And so, Jeff kept collecting, kept dissecting, filling jars with remnants of things that once lived. In the backyard, behind that neat little house, a new world was taking shape. A world where Jeff wasn't powerless, where nothing left him, not even in death. But darkness doesn't appear overnight. It seeps in, slow and silent, until it feels normal. And for Jeff, this was just the beginning. Next, we'll step into his teenage years. The drinking, the fantasies, and the moment those quiet shadows inside him start demanding more. Chapter 2. Teenage Shadows. High school. For most kids, it's the age of first crushes, awkward school dances, and pretending you actually care about algebra. For Jeff, it was different. He was there, of course, sitting in those fluorescent lit classrooms. But it was like the world was on the other side of a glass wall. He could see it, hear it, but he wasn't really in it. Jeff wasn't the kid you bullied exactly. He wasn't loud enough for that. He was the kid you overlooked. The quiet one in the back row, staring out the window, while the teacher explained quadratic equations like they were the secret to eternal life. If anyone noticed him, it was probably because of the drinking. Not at first, but soon it became his thing. Where some kids carried Walkmans in their backpacks, Jeff carried rum, vodka, whatever he could get his hands on. By 16, he was sneaking sips between classes, numbing that endless hum of emptiness that followed him everywhere. Why drink? Maybe because it silenced the noise, the constant fights at home, the ache of never fitting in, or maybe because it made everything feel less real. The problem is, once you start escaping reality, reality finds new ways to get your attention. And then there were the fantasies. They started small, like flickers at the edge of his mind. A thought here, an image there. At first, they were just ideas. Controlling someone, making sure they never left. Because everyone left Jeff, didn't they? His parents couldn't even keep a marriage together. Friends? He didn't really have those. Alcohol stayed. Alcohol never walked away. So, maybe people could be like that too, if you just made them stay. This wasn't something Jeff talked about. He didn't have a diary filled with confessions or a best friend to whisper secrets to in a dimly lit basement. These thoughts lived in silence, buried under layers of awkward smiles and drunken jokes in the school hallway. On the outside, Jeff was still forgettable. He'd show up to class half drunk, laugh too loud at things that weren't funny, and fade into the background. Teachers assumed he was just another lost teenager. They weren't wrong, just not in the way they thought. By now, the collection of bones and dead things had slowed down. Not because the fascination was gone, but because it wasn't enough anymore. Jeff didn't want to just take things apart. He wanted something different. Something alive, maybe. Something that could look at him and never leave. But for now, those ideas stayed locked in his head, hidden behind a fog of cheap liquor and quiet resentment. No one knew what was brewing inside that pale-haired boy in Bath, Ohio. Not yet. And as Jeff walked across the stage at graduation, wearing the same awkward smile as every other kid, no one clapped any louder or softer for him. Because why would they? He was just another face in the crowd. Another name on a diploma. Except, he wasn't. Next, we moved to the summer after graduation. The night that turned a fantasy into a reality, and a quiet boy into something else, entirely. Chapter 3, Graduation Night. Summer nights in Ohio have a certain stillness to them. Crickets humming, the smell of fresh-cut grass hanging in the warm air. For most kids, graduation night is a blur of laughter and cheap beer in someone's backyard. For Jeff, it was quieter, lonelier. The diploma didn't feel like an achievement. School was over, and with it, the last thin thread of structure in his life. No more teachers, no more bell schedules, just emptiness stretching out in front of him like an endless highway. His parents were done too. Lionel and Joyce had finally called it quits. The marriage that had been crumbling for years was now officially rubble. Lionel moved out. Joyce drifted somewhere else. And Jeff? He was left in a house that felt like a hollow shell. The walls didn't echo with arguments anymore. They just echoed. So, Jeff did what Jeff always did when reality got too heavy. He drank. A bottle, then another. Anything to blur the edges of that endless, yawning void inside him. But alcohol only dulls the pain. It doesn't erase it. And when the buzz faded, the thoughts were still there. The same dark fantasies that had been creeping closer for years. That night, something shifted. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the liquor, or maybe it was the realization that nothing in his life was going to change unless he made it change. And that idea, the idea of control, sparked like a match in the dark. He got in his car. The night air was heavy, thick with humidity. The road stretched ahead, empty except for the occasional glow of headlights in the distance. Jeff drove aimlessly, music playing low, his mind spinning faster than the tires. And then, like something out of a dream, there was a figure on the side of the road. A hitchhiker. Young. Alone. Thumb out. Hoping for a ride. What happened next? Well, that's the point where the story bends. The part where the quiet kid who spent his childhood collecting bones takes his first irreversible step towards something far darker. But we're not going there yet. Not in detail. Because this isn't about the shock. It's about the why. The slow burn of obsession turning into action. When the sun rose the next morning, nothing in Bath, Ohio looked different. The streets were still lined with trees, neighbors still waved as they watered their lawns. But for Jeff, the world had changed forever. And once you cross a line like that, you never go back. Next, we follow Jeff into the drift, the failed attempts at college, the army years, and the slow realization that no matter where he goes, he can't outrun himself. Chapter 4. The Drift. The summer after graduation should feel like freedom. No more teachers, no more hall passes, just an open road and a future waiting with arms wide open. For Jeff, that road was empty and it stretched on forever. No plans, no real ambitions, just a nagging hum in his chest that wouldn't go away. So he drifted. First, college. Because that's what you do, right? You pick a major, move into a dorm, and suddenly you're a whole new person. Except Jeff wasn't. He signed up for classes at Ohio State, walked those crowded hallways, and felt nothing. The same silence, the same isolation, just in a bigger building. And college had rules, deadlines, exams, social games he didn't understand. So he did what he always did when life felt too sharp around the edges. He drank. Hard. By the end of his first quarter, he'd flunked out. Just like that, college wasn't an escape. It was another failure. His father tried to help, tried to map out some kind of future for his son. And when plans A through Z fell apart, Lionel suggested something drastic. The army. Discipline. Structure. A place where Jeff could reinvent himself. And Jeff agreed, because why not? What else was there? Basic training wasn't bad. Jeff liked the order of it, the way everything had its place. March here. Eat now. Sleep when they tell you. For a while, he fit. Maybe even believed this could work, but addiction doesn't care about structure, and neither do dark thoughts. The drinking followed him, and with it the same quiet detachment that had shadowed him since high school. The army gave him a skill, though. Medical training. He learned about anatomy, about life, and how fragile it really is. Most people take that knowledge and use it to save lives. Jeff filed it away. Another tool. Another piece of the puzzle forming in his mind. 2 years in, it all fell apart. Disciplinary issues, alcohol again, they discharged him. Honorably, because that's easier on the paperwork. But the truth was, Jeff didn't belong there either. So he went back to the only place that would take him. Home. Or what was left of it. A fractured family. empty rooms, and Jeff, spinning in a world that kept offering exits he couldn't take. He tried odd jobs, tried to be normal, but that hum in his chest, louder than ever now. And every time he thought about silencing it, the same thought returned. That night, that first step he took on a lonely road in Bath, Ohio, the line he crossed and couldn't uncross. Once you've broken that barrier, the next time feels easier, almost inevitable. And so Jeff settled into a quiet routine, drinking, drifting, fantasizing, always fantasizing. Because the thing about darkness is, it doesn't just live in your head. Sooner or later, it demands space in the real world. Next, we'll follow him into the strangest chapter yet, living with his grandmother, trying to wear the mask of normal life, while inside, the shadows grew restless. Chapter 5. Grandma's House. If you were writing a script about a serial killer in the making, you probably wouldn't add this part. It doesn't fit the trope. No dark basement filled with flickering lights, no blood-red wallpaper, just a sweet old grandmother in a quiet Wisconsin neighborhood, opening her door to her troubled grandson because she believes in second chances. That was Catherine Dahmer. Church-going, warm-hearted. The kind of woman who baked cookies for the neighbors and prayed for everyone, even those who didn't deserve it. When Jeff came back from the army, aimless and unmoored, she did what grandmothers do. She gave him a place to land, her house, her rules, her hope that a little love and structure could pull him back from whatever shadows he was walking toward. And for a while, it almost looked like it worked. Jeff went to church with her, helped around the house, shared quiet meals at a floral print table under the soft hum of a ceiling fan. If you drove past that house in West Dallas, you'd see a picture of Midwestern normalcy. A grandma and her grandson living a simple life. But inside Jeff's mind, nothing had changed. If anything, the quiet made it worse. Because silence gives thoughts room to grow. And Jeff's thoughts? They weren't about church hymns or apple pie. They were about control. About keeping something, or someone, so close they could never leave. The fantasies that had been whispers in high school were now speaking louder, demanding attention. He tried to fight it in his own way. Got a job at a chocolate factory, showed up for Sunday service, even smiled when the neighbors waved. On the surface, he was doing everything right. But it was just that, a surface. Underneath, the cracks were widening. His grandmother noticed little things. The drinking, for one. The late nights. The odd smell that clung to him sometimes. She scolded him gently, like a grandmother does. Told him to straighten up, to pray harder, to keep the Lord close. Jeff nodded. Promised to do better. But faith wasn't going to save him. Nothing was. And then came the moments when he slipped. Little acts that hinted at the hunger growing inside. We won't get into details, not yet. But trust me when I say, those shadows didn't stay in his head for long. They found a way out. Quietly. Carefully. Like testing the water before diving in. Neighbors still saw him as polite, if a little odd. The quiet young man who helped his grandma with groceries and mowed her lawn. No one suspected that behind those pale eyes was a storm gathering strength, waiting for the next strike. And it was coming, because Jeff was tired of fantasizing, tired of pretending. The mask was starting to crack. Next, we step into the chapter where that mask slips completely, and the man the world would come to fear begins to take shape. Chapter 6. The Mask Cracks. On paper, Jeff's life looks stable now. A roof over his head, thanks to Grandma. A steady paycheck from the chocolate factory, sweet irony there. church on Sundays, polite nods to neighbors, mowing the lawn in the summer sun. It was almost wholesome. Almost. But inside, he was unraveling. Slowly, methodically. Like a thread pulled from the edge of a sweater. Until nothing is left but a heap of knots. The problem with pretending to be normal is that it takes effort. And effort runs out. For Jeff, every day was a performance. Smiling when spoken to, clocking in at work, nodding through small talk that felt like white noise. And after the act came the collapse. The drinking got worse. Bottles hidden in closets. Nights that ended in blackout fogs. Punctuated by fantasies that no amount of liquor could drown. These weren't idle daydreams anymore. They had shape, colour, details. They weren't whispers. They were marching orders. And Jeff, who had always been so quiet, so controlled, started listening. It began with slips. Little moments where the mask cracked. Like the time a co-worker noticed his bloodshot eyes and slurred voice during a shift. Or the night his grandmother woke to strange sounds from the basement and the smell of chemicals that didn't belong in any cleaning routine. She asked questions. Jeff gave soft answers. Nothing for her to cling to, but enough for unease to settle in her bones. And then came the compulsion. The need for control so absolute it didn't matter what it cost. Jeff didn't want company in the way most people do. He didn't crave conversation or laughter. What he wanted was permanence. A presence that couldn't walk away, couldn't reject him, couldn't vanish like his parents' marriage or the friends he never had. That idea took root. And once it did, everything else faded. Church, work, promises. They were just set pieces in a life that was no longer about survival. It was about desire. Dark, twisted desire. Wrapped in the thin disguise of normality. Soon, Jeff's nights stretched longer. He prowled bars, not for beer, but for someone to fill that void. And when someone said yes to a drink, a glance, a smile, Jeff felt a rush that no amount of alcohol could match. Because this wasn't just fantasy anymore. This was real. Flesh and blood, real. And here's the chilling part. It didn't happen in an instant. There was no single breaking point, no lightning strike. It was a slow slide. One step, then another. Each one easier than the last. Until one night, Jeff crossed the line again. Quietly. Deliberately. With a calm that should terrify you more than any scream. What happened next would lay the foundation for everything that followed. The apartment, the headlines, the horror that would make his name echo through history. But we're not there yet. Because before the world saw the monster, Jeff perfected the mask one last time. Next, we follow him as he leaves Grandma's house for good, and builds the stage for his darkest acts in a small Milwaukee apartment. Chapter 7. Welcome to Milwaukee. Milwaukee, 1990. A city like any other, busy by day, humming quietly at night. Neon lights buzz over corner bars. Trains rattle past aging apartment blocks. To most people, it's just life in the Midwest. Unremarkable, ordinary. But for Jeff, this city was an opportunity, a fresh start. After years of drifting, from college to the army to Grandma's house, Jeff wanted independence, freedom, or at least that's what he told his family. Lionel thought it was progress, his boy, finally standing on his own 2 feet. Even Grandma believed it, relieved that the strange smells and late-night noises would be someone else's problem now. Jeff moved into a small apartment on 25th Street. A 1-bedroom box with beige walls and a view of nothing in particular. It wasn't much, but for Jeff, it was perfect. Quiet. Private. A space where no one would ask questions, where the only rules were his own. He decorated sparingly, a few thrift store chairs, a fish tank bubbling softly in the corner, a bed against the wall, made just neat enough to look normal. It looked like a bachelor's apartment. Nothing more, nothing less. That was the point. By day, Jeff still played the part. He clocked in at the chocolate factory, exchanged polite nods, laughed when he was supposed to. By night, though, the mask loosened. The bar scene in Milwaukee was lively enough. Faces in and out, names forgotten as soon as they were spoken. For Jeff, it was the perfect hunting ground. And here's what makes this chapter of the story so chilling. Nobody noticed. Not really. The neighbors heard music sometimes, maybe a drill now and then, but people mind their business in cities like this. Doors stay shut, eyes look away, and Jeff knew it, counted on it. The fantasies that had haunted him for years weren't whispers anymore. They were blueprints. He didn't just want someone to stay. He wanted control, permanence, possession. And in that little apartment with its humming fish tank and cheap curtains, Jeff had found the stage for his private play. There were close calls, of course, times when neighbors complained about the smell, times when someone almost saw behind the mask. But Jeff had an answer for everything. Bad plumbing, rotten meat, excuses delivered in a calm voice, with those pale eyes that never quite gave anything away. If you passed him on the street, you wouldn't look twice. He was quiet, polite, even charming in a shy, awkward way. And that, more than anything, is why this story still grips us. Because monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes, they look like the guy holding the door for you at the laundromat. Next, we move into the spiral. The point where control becomes obsession. And obsession becomes a pattern no one stops, until it's far too late. Chapter 8. The Spiral. Patterns have a way of forming quietly. One choice becomes two. Two become 10. And before you realize it, the choices are making you. For Jeff, that's how it happened. What began as a craving had become a routine. Not overnight. Slowly. Like water dripping on stone until the surface gives way. It started small, nights out at the bars, meeting strangers. At first, it was about company. Or that's what he told himself. A drink shared, a few words, maybe a smile that lasted longer than most. But Jeff wasn't looking for conversation. He never was. What he wanted was something deeper. Something no one could give freely. Control. That hunger grew louder each time. The nights stretched longer. The spaces between them shorter. What had once been fantasy became habit. And Jeff, quiet, awkward Jeff, was living a life no one suspected. On the surface, he kept up the act. He still worked at the factory, clocked his hours, cashed his paycheck. He still smiled at neighbors when they passed in the hallway, carrying groceries. If anyone asked, he was fine. Just a guy living alone in the city. No drama, no trouble. But the truth? His world had shrunk to a single point of obsession. He didn't think about the future, about careers or relationships or anything normal people worried about. His thoughts looped like a broken record. Control, permanence, possession. He wanted to hold something so completely that it couldn't ever leave him. The apartment reflected that shift. At first, it looked like any other small space, messy but ordinary. Then came the little changes. A lock added to a door. A curtain drawn and never opened. A smell that no amount of air freshener could mask. Complaints trickled in from neighbors. Something foul, they said. Something wrong. Jeff had excuses ready, always calm, Always reasonable. The freezer broke. Bad meat. And people accepted it because why wouldn't they? He wasn't the type you'd picture when you thought of danger. That's what makes stories like this so terrifying. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles at you in the elevator and says, "Have a good night." The spiral tightened with every step. The fantasies that once lived in Jeff's head now demanded more. And each time he gave in, the line between reality and desire blurred a little further, until there was no line left, just the hunger. And so, while the world outside carried on, people laughing in bars, couples holding hands under streetlights, inside apartment 213, something unspeakable was unfolding. Quietly, methodically, like clockwork. Next, we're heading into the breaking point. The smell, the sound, the suspicion that finally grows too big to ignore. And when the door finally opens, the world will never forget what they find inside. Chapter 9. The Night They Walked Away. Milwaukee, late May, 1991. A warm night, the kind where the air feels heavy and time seems to slow. At 2 a.m, the streets were mostly empty, except for one boy. 14 years old, barefoot, dazed, barely able to stand. His name was Konorak Synthesomphone, and he was fighting for his life without even knowing it. 2 women spotted him first. Sandra Smith and Nicole Childress. They were shocked. The boy was half naked, bleeding, shaking like his body wanted to run, but couldn't. They rushed to him, asking questions, trying to make sense of the scene. He couldn't answer much. Words came out broken, soft, like whispers from another world. They called the police. When the patrol car rolled up, officers John Baltazak and Joseph Gabrish stepped out. Calm, casual, as if this was another late-night disturbance in a city used to noise. They saw the boy, small, terrified, unable to stand straight. And then they saw him. Jeffrey Dahmer, walking toward them with that same flat calm that had fooled everyone before. "It's okay," Jeff said, his voice steady, almost warm. "He's my boyfriend. He's just drunk. We had a fight." The officers looked at the women, who looked back in disbelief. "He's a kid," they said. "Look at him. He's hurt." Jeff smiled, embarrassed. "He's 19, he explained, lowering his voice as if sharing a private truth. "We live together, just a little domestic thing. You know how it is." The officers shifted uncomfortably. It was 1991, and the idea of walking into a gay couple's apartment was something they'd rather avoid. So they laughed, made a joke into their radio, reuniting the lovebirds. The women begged them not to let Jeff take him back. One even pointed out the blood. But Jeff was calm, controlled, every word measured. "He's had too much to drink," he said. "He just needs to sleep it off." And then came the moment. The one that still chills anyone who hears it. The officers walked the boy back to Jeff's apartment, past the smell that clung to the hallway, past the door that hid a nightmare. Inside, they glanced around. A tidy living room, a fish tank bubbling softly. Jeff offered them beer. They declined. They didn't see the Polaroids on the dresser. Didn't open the fridge. They believed him. And they left. Konorak Synthesomphone was dead within an hour. Later, when the truth came out, those officers would become infamous. The phone call they made as they left the building, laughing about the lovers, would play on news stations for weeks. And Milwaukee would burn with anger, because the monster wasn't hiding. He was standing right in front of them, smiling. And they walked away. The last door expanded. July 22nd, 1991. Milwaukee at night, heavy with summer heat. The street shimmered under the orange glow of streetlights, quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. Inside apartment 213, the air was heavier still. Tracy Edwards sat on a worn couch, a drink sweating in his hand. He'd come here thinking it was just another night out, one more bar, one more stranger. But now, sitting under the hum of a fish tank and the low buzz of fluorescent light, something didn't feel right. Jeff was calm, too calm. His voice soft, almost gentle, as he spoke in fragments, about movies, about keeping Tracy company, about not leaving. The words were simple, but the tone, they landed like bricks. Tracy laughed nervously, trying to play along, but his eyes kept drifting to the door. It was locked, bolted, and then came the smell. Not the faint sourness he'd noticed at first. The smell that seemed to cling to the hallway, but a stronger stench, seeping from somewhere unseen. Sweet, rancid, wrong. Tracy swallowed hard. His gut told him to run. His body stayed frozen. Jeff handed him another drink. "Relax," he murmured, his pale eyes catching the light in a way that didn't feel human anymore. Tracy noticed the photographs on the dresser. Just a corner of one, half hidden beneath a wallet. He couldn't make out what it showed, just enough to make his skin crawl. Then Jeff leaned closer, whispered something. Tracy couldn't even process the words before he saw the knife. That's when instinct took over. He shoved hard and the world blurred. The couch toppled, the glass shattered, and Tracy ran. Through the door, bolt snapping loose, into the hallway, down the stairs two at a time. Bare feet slapping concrete, heart pounding like a war drum. Out into the night, into the open air, his voice cracking into a scream as he waved down a passing patrol car. Two officers, Robert Routh and Rolf Mueller, watched a man collapse against their squad car, gasping out fragments of horror. Words like knife and locked door, and he tried to, before the panic swallowed the rest. They drove back to 25th Street with Tracy in the back, still shaking, pointing a trembling hand toward the door of apartment 213. Jeff opened it calmly. No panic, no sweat. Just that same quiet smile. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said softly. He let them in, showed his ID, answered every question with measured politeness, the way he always had. The officers stepped inside. The first thing that hit them was the smell. Thick, clinging, almost alive. Their eyes swept the room. Fish tank, bed, dresser. A normal apartment almost. "Mind if we look around?" one asked. Jeff nodded, stepping aside. Then came the Polaroids. At first, just one. Then a handful. Then dozens. Photos so precise, so deliberate, the air in the room turned colder with each frame. Mueller froze. "These are real," he whispered to his partner, voice tight, almost breaking. The cuffs came out. Jeff didn't fight, didn't beg. Just looked at them with the same flat calm he'd worn his whole life, and said, almost tenderly, "For what I did, I should be dead." And with that, it was over. The last door had opened, and the world was about to see what had been hiding in plain sight. Chapter 11. Inside apartment 213. The smell didn't just linger, it clung. Even after Jeff was cuffed and let out, the air inside apartment 213 was thick, almost sticky, with the kind of stench that lives in your clothes long after you leave. The officers stood in the doorway for a beat too long, like their bodies knew before their minds could catch up. This was no misunderstanding. They began to search. At first glance, the room looked almost ordinary. A small couch, a fish tank bubbling gently, a few framed pictures on the wall. Beige carpet, beige curtains. Nothing screamed nightmare. But then their eyes adjusted to the details that made the hairs on their necks stand up. On the dresser, Polaroids, not hidden away, stacked, layered, each one more impossible than the last. Poses too deliberate, bodies too still. For a moment, the officers thought, hoped, they were fake. Then the truth sank in like ice water. They opened a drawer, more photos, a box beneath the bed. Inside, something wrapped in plastic. The shape was unmistakable. And then came the fridge. One officer hesitated before pulling the door open, as if some small part of him believed not looking could make it untrue. But the smell told the story before the door did. He slammed it shut, his stomach flipping, his brain trying to file what his eyes had seen into a category that didn't exist. They found a barrel in the corner, industrial, blue, filled with chemicals. Gallons of acid lined up neatly beside it, labels peeling in the heat. A set of power tools resting in perfect order, like instruments laid out for a symphony no one should ever hear. As the evidence techs moved in, they worked in silence. Gloves snapping, cameras clicking, each flash illuminating something worse than the last. Polaroids, bone fragments, skulls tucked away like collectibles. And with every discovery came the weight of the numbers. 17. 17 lives erased inside these walls. Men who walked in smiling and never walked out again. Each one lured with promises of easy money or a drink after dark. Each one reduced to an object in Jeff's obsessive quest for permanence. Why? That question hung in the humid air as officers documented every square inch of that apartment. Later, Jeff would explain it in words as flat as his tone. I didn't want them to leave. That was it. 6 words that carried the gravity of hell. By the time the last piece of evidence was bagged, the story had already started to leak. Reporters gathering outside, microphones buzzing, the name Jeffrey Dahmer rolling off tongues like a curse. The quiet man at the end of the hall, the polite neighbor, the factory worker, was now something else. Something the world would never forget. And the strangest part? Apartment 213 didn't look like the lair of a monster. It looked normal, ordinary, like any other one-bedroom in Milwaukee. Maybe that's what kept everyone awake at night. The realization that evil doesn't need shadows to hide in. Sometimes it sits behind beige curtains and smiles when you say hello. Next comes the trial. The cameras, the headlines, and the man at the center of it all, sitting as calm as if none of this was real. Chapter 12. The Trial and the Myth. When Jeffrey Dahmer walked into the courtroom, the world was already watching. News vans lined the streets like soldiers. Cameras flashed from every corner, their light cutting through the dull winter grey of Milwaukee. Reporters barked questions that vanished into the cold air. Inside, the tension was a living thing. Thick, electric, humming under the sound of shuffling papers and creaking benches. And then came Jeff. No handcuffs now, by court order. Dressed in a plain shirt, glasses perched on his nose, his expression as flat as a frozen lake. He didn't scan the room, didn't flinch at the sea of faces staring back. If he felt anything at all, it didn't show. 17 counts of murder. It each charge read aloud like the toll of a distant bell. 17 lives, 17 echoes, each one heavy enough to crush the air out of the room. The families sat behind him, clutching tissues, photographs, fragments of lives that no verdict could restore. The prosecution laid it out clinically. The Polaroids, the remains, the confessions so detailed they sounded rehearsed. There was no question of what happened, only why. That was the battlefield now. The defense argued insanity. They spoke of obsessions, compulsions, a mind bent and broken beyond repair. Experts testified for hours, dissecting his brain like a puzzle that might explain the unexplainable. But the prosecution countered with something colder. Choice. They said Jeff knew right from wrong, that he planned, concealed, evaded, that he wasn't insane, just monstrous. And through it all, Jeff sat motionless. His voice, when it came, was calm, almost gentle. "I didn't want them to leave," he said. And later, "For what I did, I should be dead. No excuses, no theatrics, just words that hung in the air like frost." The verdict landed like a hammer. Guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment, 17 terms, stacked like bricks. As if numbers could matter in a life like his. Prison was the end of the story. Almost. Jeff spent 2 years behind bars, quiet as ever, until November 1994. A mop, a bathroom, another inmate with a steel bar. And just like that, Jeffrey Dahmer was dead. Beaten beyond recognition in a place built to contain monsters. Some called it justice. Others called it irony. Jeff, for what it's worth, once said he welcomed death. Maybe he meant it, maybe not. But the story didn't die with him. It never does. Documentaries, books, podcasts, Netflix binges. The name Jeffrey Dahmer has become cultural shorthand for something we still don't understand. We say it like a ghost story, shiver at the details, and then press play for the next episode. Why? Maybe because Jeff didn't look like the monster we expect. He didn't lurk in alleys or stalk through shadows. He held doors open, cashed paychecks, shook hands. He smiled at neighbors and offered the cops a beer. And that ordinariness is the part that keeps us awake at night. Because if evil can look that normal, that human, how safe do you really feel? Jeffrey Dahmer, a name that still sends shivers down the spine, not because of monsters in the dark, but because of the quiet faces we never suspect. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you think. And if you'd like to support these stories, you can do that at ko-fi.com/napmax. I want to hear from you. Why do you think stories like this fascinate us so much? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe. This was Napmax Sleep Stories. Sweet dreams, sleepless rabble, if you can.